Thou art my haven and my refuge. None have I sought, nor any will I seek save thee. No path have I trodden, no any will I tread, but the path of thy love. In the darksome night of despair, my eye turneth expectant and full of hope to the morn of thy boundless favor, and at the hour of dawn my drooping soul is refreshed and strengthened in remembrance of thy beauty and perfection. He whom the grace of thy mercy aideth, though he be but a drop, shall become the boundless ocean, and the merest atom, which the outpourings of thy loving kindness assisteth, shall shine even as a radiant star. Shelter under thy protection, O thou spirit of purity. Thou art the all-bountiful provider, this enthralled and kindled servant of thine. Aid him in this world of being, to remain steadfast and firm in thy love, and grant that this broken winged bird attain a refuge and shelter in thy divine nest that abideth upon the celestial tree.
Now is the time for you. 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 To become as bounteous cups that are filled to overflowing, and even as the reviving gusts that blow from the upper paradise, to scatter the fragrance amongst across that land, across that land. Now is the time for you. Release yourselves from this world's life, and at every stage longing for non-existence. Release yourselves from this world's life, and at every stage longing for non-existence. For when the rain returneth to the sun, it is wiped out, and when the drop cometh to the sea, it vanisheth, and when the true lover findeth his beloved, he yieldeth up his soul, he yieldeth up his soul. Now is the time for you. 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 To become as bounteous cups that are filled to overflowing. And even as the reviving gusts that blow from the Abha paradise scatter the fragrance of musk across that land, across that land. Now is the time for you. Release yourselves from this world's life, and at every stage longing for non-existence. Release yourselves from this world's life, and at every stage longing for non-existence. For when the rain return into the sun, it is wiped out, and when the drop come into the sea, it vanisheth. And when the true lover findeth his beloved, he healeth up his soul, he healeth up his soul. For when the rain return into the sun, it is wiped out. And when the drop come into the sea, it vanisheth. And when the true lover findeth his beloved, he healeth up his soul, he healeth up his soul. Now is the time for you. 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 Now is the time for you.
Thank you so much. So lucky to have so many talented youth with us tonight. Thank you, Mona, Eli, and Asher. Those beautiful prayer and songs. So now we'd like to turn it to Mr. Naylor. For anyone who hasn't had the pleasure of meeting Gordon Naylor before, or hearing him speak, last week we enjoyed his webinar on creating wise leaders, more specifically on youth mental health and happiness. And tonight we are going to hear more about creating those wise leaders. Mr. Naylor is the founder and principal of Nancy Campbell Academy, and he's been instrumental in creating, developing, and successfully implementing programs for the education and empowerment of youth and families in North and South America. He's completed his graduate studies in international education, clinical psychology, and educational administration. And the development of human potential has been the focus of his work over the past 45 years. Mr. Naylor, besides being the founder and principal at Nancy Campbell Academy, is also has some other companies and also lectures extensively throughout the world on education and moral leadership. So I'll turn it over to him, and welcome, Mr. Naylor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm glad that everyone has been able to join us. I did see Brett warming up his guitar, so I hope he's going to play something for us. So I don't know if he's supposed to do that at the end, or is that for later? Yeah, okay. All right. I'm always eager to hear this music, what Mona did and what the gentleman in the Smith family there did, harmonizing and all of that. I felt like I was being treated to an event that I wouldn't want to miss. So I'm glad that we had that first. I'm just wondering if we can transfer the share capability to Roya, because we are going to look at a few slides. So I don't know who is the techno wizard that's going to do that.
You want to make her co-host?
That's right, if you would. She has actually been my executive assistant for quite a long time now. And unfortunately for me, she's leaving on May 2nd to go to Seychelles, where she's going to get married to another fellow from the World Center, and they're both going back to the World Center to serve for a number of years after that. So it's a sad and happy time for me. Happy that she's getting married and has found her beloved, but sad that I'm going to lose her as an executive assistant. So next time I may not be able to do anything with my slides or my projecting capacity. So anyway, so please give her a round of applause for her upcoming marriage. Yay. These are weird times for these are weird times for celebrating things because you can't really hug people. Oh, there you go. You're getting rooted for from some of the youth that you've worked with over the years at Wildfire. She'll be really missed because she's done so much service with the youth in Ontario, and they're going to be missing her as we all will be.
Well, so, everybody can come visit in Haifa, so.
Yeah, do you want to say anything, Roya?
No, just come. You know where to find me now. Someone to hang out with when you're on pilgrimage or on a visit or come to see the shrine. So the Shrine of Abdul Baha. I'll be looking for all of your faces while I'm there, and it'll be a nice joy.
Yeah, she'll be there at a very historic time of the opening of the Shrine of Abdul Baha, and I'm sure that she'll be excited to see all those things. And we'll be living vicariously through her presence. She better send some really good videos and stuff. That's all I have to say of that event for those of us who won't be there. So
yeah, I'm on Zoom meeting. I'm on Zoom meeting too.
Oh, okay. Are we good? Okay. So the slides that basically we have a bit of a PowerPoint to look at. I'm going to just sort of put one up and then put it down, or have Roya do that so that we can chat. So the subject, as you know, there is still the webinar to view, but I was able to be here to speak. So Farjan, sorry, Firuz invited me to speak instead of watching the webinar. So, but we're going to sort of continue with this theme of raising wise leaders and strengthening youth and making wise judgments. Do you want to move to the next one, Roy? Wisdom. By the wise is meant men whose knowledge is not confined to mere words and whose lives have been fruitful and have produced enduring results. So there's this connection made in the writings by Baha'u'llah of wisdom to action, and that we gain the capacity for wisdom by doing things, not just by thinking about things. You want to go to the next one? And the next one? So we're going to talk a little bit about, in all things it is necessary to consult, this matter should be forcibly stressed by thee, so that consultation may be observed by all. So you can take it down now, Roya. Just open up the screen. So this, you know, what we wanted to talk about tonight really was the theme of how to help strengthen our capacity to make wise decisions, and how to help youth make wise decisions, and how does someone develop wisdom. Because certainly when I started the Nancy Campbell Academy, the goal for the teachers that we all identified was to create wise individuals. You know, when I say create, they have to do the development, but our job is to make sure that we create an environment that supports the development of wisdom, because wisdom is what is lacking. We're living in a world right now that is capable of doing all kinds of horrific things and all kinds of wonderful things. And wisdom is what dictates which of those we do. Our capacity to use our judgment. Just because we can do anything we want certainly doesn't mean that we should. And so how do we develop this capacity to guide this limitless amount of resources that are out there in a world that really has, unfortunately, not ever learned how to develop and balance the resources, to the point that people don't actually have enough to live on. Yesterday, I was in a presentation where somebody from the Gambia, one of our students from the Gambia, was talking about their community and saying that people there live on $1 a day, and that during COVID, they couldn't even make that $1. So in many families, people didn't have food. And there was another presenter from Brazil, from Manaus, who was talking about how COVID has hit their community so badly and how they were having so many deaths. And he said, every day you hear about one of your friends dying. They didn't have oxygen in the hospitals to help the people that had the disease. And consequently, there were many people that were expiring. And this youth did an amazing thing. He decided to do whatever he could to raise funds on GoFundMe in different ways. And then he took that money and made bargains with the restaurants to feed the healthcare workers, who also, in many cases, weren't making enough to have food themselves, and they were caring for the sick or trying to. And so he did this wonderful initiative that you could see by the pictures of the people that he had been able to help were so uplifted by that. But, you know, it's this all in a backdrop, really, of a world that has limitless resources. I remember that when I say limitless resources, if we use them in a sustainable way, of course. But the fact of the matter is, I remember I met a man who had traveled to about 135 countries of the world. And he said, I was only ever in one poor country. And I was kind of surprised, because I thought, okay, I think there's got to be more than one poor country. And he said, no. And I said, well, what country did you think was poor? And he said, Japan. And I said, Japan is not poor. Like, they're doing very well, apparently. And he said, well, when I talk about poor, I talk about the resources of the place. And Japan really was built on volcanic rock. And in terms of a physical space of being able to sustain their people, they've done the most miraculous job. So he was talking about the physical resources, saying that other countries, it was not about lack of capacity of the land to provide, but it was how things were being done and what knowledge was shared in order for everybody to be able to live in a good way. So it's an interesting concept to say that when we think about leadership, do we really think about the moral imperatives that leaders must have? And leaders must always be thinking about the common good. If they are not focused on the development of the common good, and if they don't believe in the idea that the enrichment of all is really the true enrichment of your own self, then we really won't see the kinds of changes that we need to see. Because in effect, in the Baha'i writings, it makes very clear that God has given us everything that's needed, really, for us to have happy lives. And he even says that happiness is our birthright. So if happiness is our birthright, then how are we having so much unhappiness? And what can we do in order to change that condition? And whose responsibility is it to change that condition? It seems also that when we're in a place where we think others are looking after things, it causes us to sometimes become quite apathetic, or maybe not able to see the suffering around us or the difficulties. And in effect, sometimes we don't want to see it because we don't know what we could do about it. We don't know how we could help. But we have to realize that in reality, the only way that the world is going to be able to deal with the volume of its problems is to kind of break it down into small chunks. And in the Baha'i world, that's what's happened. The House of Justice has caused every country of the world to look at clusters of populations throughout their country, and then ask the Baha'i community to focus on the spiritual and material development of those clusters. And that means that we are not thinking about focusing on looking after ourselves, but we're focusing on looking after that whole community. So we are to become profoundly interested and feel personally responsible for what is happening in our cluster, because this is the age of maturity. And in the age of maturity, no matter what our ages and stages of life are, we have to take on this responsibility. Now, of course, when I say we take it on, it doesn't mean we have to do everything, but together we can figure out how to solve these problems. It's not going to be possible to come up with a plan for some agency or some government, whether international or national, to look after everybody in the world. It's just not feasible, because one thing that my professor once told me at OISE, which I really liked, he said, you know, organizations don't exist. And I said, what do you mean? There's banks, there's all these institutions. He said, organizations don't exist. People exist. In the end, it's just people. And it's how we've organized people to live right and to have a good life. And if people are not organized right, then that organization that's causing things that are not going well or harming individuals has to stop, and we have to reorganize. But the reorganization is not a reality. The people are the reality. So whenever an idea becomes bigger or greater or more important than human lives, then we've got a serious problem. And we are the ones that are to try to address it in small or big ways. Now, you know, I was listening to this young youth I told you about from Brazil, and as he's presenting to the school his service project, and he wasn't a Nancy Campbell graduate, but he was a youth that was in business school, and he just decided he had to do something because he couldn't take all this suffering. And I thought to myself, well, how is he going to take on Manaus, for heaven's sakes? I've been to Manaus, and it's a vast area, a vast population. But as he outlined the things that he had done, the efforts he had made to get masks and medical supplies and you know, food, and with very little money, but had managed to help many lives. You know, it just reiterated this point that it's not by big solutions that this is going to change, but by us looking strategically at our community and trying to think, what is the real needs here and how can I be of some service? I don't know how many of you have seen New Amsterdam. I'm promoting New Amsterdam. It's a series on Netflix. And the reason I'm promoting it is because I just love the director of the hospital, who his number one line when he comes into any situation, no matter how bizarre those situations are, is how can I help? He just says, how can I help? And then he listens to the people, and then he creates an amazing answer or a problem. Like all his staff were complaining, just an example, all his staff were complaining about how much time they didn't have. So he checked out and he tried to figure out, how do I give back time to people? Then he decided in New York City that he would rent buses so that he could take his employees home directly and save them 2 hours a day, which meant they were happier coming to work and they were more able to do their work. So it didn't matter what the problem was that they identified, but it really was, how can I help? And how can I make a difference? And that's what this young man in Brazil had done. He had asked himself that question, how can I help? And with his limited capacity, what he had available, his resources as a student, what can I do? And he figured out what to do. And it made a huge difference in their lives. And they were so happy to receive these things and sent him wonderful emails. Now, we don't do it for the glory of the moment, but we actually do it because it does make a difference. And no one can tell you how to make a difference in your community. People can try to tell you, but if you have a look at your cluster and you try to figure out what would be most helpful if I do something. Now, some of the youth that are here tonight are people that are working on junior youth groups, trying to get junior youth to understand how to read their own social reality, helping junior youth start to understand what are some of the spiritual and moral principles that they would put to work so that the junior youth can start to understand how they can make a difference in their community. Every junior youth group that has a service project, no matter what it is, and also uses the arts, will have a great impact. If we don't have service projects and art projects in our junior youth groups, they often become a little bit boring, sorry to say. So we have to make sure that we have art projects and we have service projects all the time on the go. Doesn't mean every session we have to do it, but there's no sense studying that theory, because as that last quote said, it's the knowledge we have and doing things that makes the difference. That's how we start to develop wise judgment. If we sit down too much with the books and we don't do anything, then we got a problem. If we try to go out and do something and we do it without understanding spiritual principles and the principles necessary, then we might do some things that we shouldn't be doing. So we want to be of influence that is good. Both of those things have to go together. We can't do one or the other. And then art is there because we can express ourselves in unique ways. And nothing moves people's hearts more than the arts. Like when you hear Mona's song, how can you not have your heart moved? When we hear the Smith Brothers singing, how can you not think, like, it just gave me joy. I thought, okay, this is so exciting. I feel like I should go and do some more things. So these things just inspire us, uplift us in moments of whatever happens. So the arts are really important for uplifting. Even in the writings, it says when Baha'u'llah was chained in the dungeon and had these chains on his neck that ripped into his flesh and weighed his body down, it was so wonderful if one of the believers could sing a song, and they would start chanting verses or singing. So while they had to endure that horrible situation, they were able to transcend it. Why? Because we are not victims. We're not victims of crazy people doing crazy things to us, or we're not victims of out of control things happening to us. Yes, those things are happening to us, but we are transcendent beings. That is our nature. We have a noble nature, and we can transcend above whatever it is that is before us. And if we understand our nature, then all we have to do is figure out, what do we need in order to transcend? How do we get above this? How do we create something better than this? And that's what human beings were created to do, to aspire to greatness. And I don't care whether it's a little change or a big change, any change starts a chain of discipline happening, and we start to transform ourselves. So, and as we work together with others, we start to consult more. And this idea of that we must consult together in all things we must consult. And I was surprised to read that he says, and he stresses this forcibly. Well, I don't know if you read many of the Baha'i writings, but there's very few things that he says forcibly about, So he means you should stress that we have to talk about this. When we're having any difficulties, the environment starts to decay and fall down. When we come together to consult, our words together start to transform our consciousness. It starts to raise our consciousness. And this is a mystical process, okay? It's not just a wordy process that we're talking about saying some words together and what difference would that make. But it's a spiritual process that as we share our thoughts about problems and difficulties, and we come together in unity to try to deal with these difficulties. And just being present and willing to talk is how we come together in unity. And then the truth could be released. The truth is released. It didn't come from any one bright person sitting there, but it came because of this power of unity to want to come together and solve a collective problem. Because that was the spirit that was seen, the Creator releases the power to transcend that difficulty to a higher level. So this is a mystical process. We're only using 10% of our brain so far, maybe a little bit more, I don't know. Some of you might be brighter than the rest of us, but the fact of the matter is we have a lot of brain yet to expand to. And that's going to happen by us requiring that brain. If we just keep doing what we're doing so far, we have no reason to expand our brain. We might as well just keep it the same, or maybe even diminish it, because some of us are using less than we actually need. We're not even thinking. So if we think about this, by coming together and consulting and believing that we can transcend things as we come together, instead of believing, oh, why are we coming together? Why do we want to talk? Nothing new is going to be said. All the things that people say when you say, let's look at this, So you get all these negativity, apathetic, lethargic things that kill everything that's good and make you feel like you're going further into the garbage. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that come together who believe, and that's why they're coming together, who believe they can make a difference and they can transcend something. And I'll challenge you that whenever that group comes together, whoever they are, and they do anything, then ask people how they feel. Ask whoever you've touched how they feel. And I can guarantee you that just the fact that you tried transforms people. Just the fact that a little difference might have been made inspires people. These things all happen. You know, I had a friend who ran a property management company. This is probably not the best example of what I just talked about, but I think it's kind of interesting. When they take over a big building that was deteriorated, the first thing they do is they'd hire somebody to be there from 7 in the morning until 9:30, and then in the afternoon from 4 to 7 o'clock. And all they wanted them to do was to polish the elevators. Polish the elevators, keep the floor clean from the front door to the elevator, and just keep polishing those elevators. Then they would go in and everyone would start this buzz about, yeah, the new management's really taken over the building. They made such a difference. They've made everything look so much better. And he'd say that all we did was polish the elevators. And then of course they'd get to the other things. But just people being able to see something is happening started them to feel better and got the whole process in the right direction instead of, oh, this building is going, all the things that people say. So it was a way. And he said, so the conclusion about this is change is important. Even if it's just a little tiny change, everything makes a difference. And it starts people, if it's a little tiny positive change, it starts people thinking differently. So I'm saying this because I don't want people to leave here thinking they have to go out and do a major renovation of the whole society. That's not likely going to happen that quickly. But making a difference in a smaller way makes a huge difference in people's lives. And I'll bet you that you can think of something that somebody did for you when you were 7 or you were 10 or you were 12, somebody older that did something for you that you still remember. So that's how much they're going to remember when we do something for them. If a youth does something for junior youth, they'll remember them. In fact, great thinkers of the past said, give me a child between the ages of 10 and 14 and I will have them for life. It's a very interesting thing. Because why? Because if you care about junior youth and you care about children, they know that and they feel that and they know when it's genuine. And if you really want to be of service to them, you will see that this makes a huge difference in their life. So let's go to the next slide, Roy, because I just want to kind of zip through those and then we're going to have more of a discussion about your response. So don't be thinking I'm just going to be talking at you. We're going to talk with you. So in all things, it is necessary to consult. Consultation bestows greater awareness and transmutes conjecture into certitude. This means that when we are thinking about something, if we talk about it with somebody, it increases our awareness of all the elements of it. And it transmutes our thinking from, oh, I wonder if I should do this, or I wonder if I should do that, to certitude. I know I should do this. I know this is what should happen. Now, people sometimes don't like to talk to others because once they do, they feel more committed and they have to do what they talked about. But let's not worry about that. Let's worry about sharing our thoughts and ideas with each other so that we can become more certain about our direction. Baha'u'llah states that it is a shining light which in a dark world leads the way and guides. Well, I don't know about you, but people are thinking pretty dark things at this time. So in a dark world, we really need to intensify our levels of consultation with people. And it will help to guide them and help to guide us. For everything there is and will continue to be a station of perfection and maturity. The maturity of the gift of understanding is made manifest through consultation. So if you really want to show understanding to your fellow human beings, and even just be present with them, you don't have to solve their problems, but just be present with them. Abdu'l-Baha says that when we have somebody tell us their story of what they suffered and what they've endured, that the angels and chosen ones of heaven will circle round you in the worlds beyond this one and sing your praises for having given that person the time that you gave for them to tell their story of difficulties to you. And then help them to move from that to another level. So what's the next one, Rhea? Dr. William Hatcher, a renowned expert in philosophy and mathematics, stated, a friend of mine, that if the knowledge of the inherent nobility of each human being were taught to humanity, this would radically change everything. So one of the things that we really have to learn how to do, if we haven't already, is constantly be reminding ourselves that whoever we're coming in contact with is a noble human being that God created for a purpose, and that we have to help them to make their contribution. That's our goal. One is to affirm that you are valuable to the human race, that you're a noble being, and that it's our goal to try to figure out how to help you make your contribution. How can I help? That would be the line. Okay, next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about environments, how to create environments that are uplifting instead of ones that are that bring us down. So if we're in an environment where there are no limits or no expectations or no goals, what that actually leads to, you can see the emotion that that leads to is anxiety. So if you're feeling anxious, it's usually because of these things, okay? So we don't know what's expected of us. We don't know what we can do. We don't have any goals. We're just trying to get by. That leaves us in a state of anxiety. And anxiety leads us to either being aggressive or apathetic. Historically, I would say females tend to use the apathetic route and males tend to use the aggressive route. But very often now it's all over the map. And of course, it's not a gender thing. You choose the response that you have. But when you're feeling anxious, you start to get angry feelings, or you start to feel like, what's the use? So this can kind of lead you into a sense of depression or a sense of hopelessness, or it can get you into trouble. And so this is an important circle to look at. Once I had a father come to when I was doing treatment in Nova Scotia, and he brought his son, and his son was jumping all over the couches and all over the place while we're trying to talk. And he was just so out of control. And his father kept saying, "This boy's so out of control. I don't know what to do with him. He's crazy." And I'm sitting there thinking, dear Lord, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to let him keep jumping? Am I supposed to get control of the father? And he was dropping him off for treatment. So then the father left, thank God, at that point. And that boy who was now swinging from the rafters, I took down and put him on a chair. And I said, I want you to sit here for 15 minutes, because I was trying to find out what he could do. And he looked at me, and I knew he was thinking he was just going to tell me, where to go or whatever he had to do. He had no intention of sitting there for 15 minutes. And I said, no, you sit here for 15 minutes, or I'm going to hold you here for 30 minutes. And I'm getting paid by the hour, and it doesn't matter which one I do. I wanted him to know the parameters of what we're dealing with. So what do you think happened? He sat there for 15 minutes, no problem. And we had a nice discussion about how he's got to get control of himself. So let's go to the next one. He was suffering from anxiety because he didn't have any clear expectations or limits. And his father thought that he was crazy, but it was more his father's thoughts than his reality, because he could control himself. So this is how do you create a positive environment? A positive environment, you establish clear limits. And when I say these should be the basic ones about how we treat each other. We don't hurt each other. We don't break things, because that could harm ourselves or others. So these are really basic, but they're clear. The second one is encouragement to be of service. When we come together, we want to encourage each other to be of service. We want to offer each other service opportunities. We want to offer ourselves for service. So that's a very important concept to get across, a big idea to get across to your junior youth. And we take a posture of learning. It doesn't matter what you know how to do. We're just going to try to figure out how to do something that makes a difference for somebody. And we'll build our capacity by doing that. So it doesn't matter if we make mistakes doing it, because we're just learning how. So this is a posture of learning. And afterwards, we'll look at it. We'll decide whether or not it's useful or not useful. And we'll try to figure out whether or not we should keep doing it or not keep doing it because it was good or it wasn't good. So that's what we do. We kind of reflect. Permission to exceed expectations. Always that has to be there. I want my child to be successful, but I would like them to be even more successful than I think they can be. And I'm quite happy if they choose that. So I want them to know that I may have some ideas, but I want them to do even more. So because human beings constantly surprise us with their capabilities. And so we must never forget that. And it must be part of the environment we create. We're open to see what it is you can do. What can you make a difference doing? Like, who would have thought that we could have heard that beautiful music? I could look at people and say, well, what do I know? But listen to what we just heard, the harmonization of those two guys, the beautiful notes hit by Mona. I mean, really, would you have expected you could do that? You know, maybe somebody who knows what they're doing would, but if I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, wow, this is something. So what does it do when I see any of these things happening? It creates feelings of joy, feelings of happiness, and it makes you feel secure and a feeling of well-being. That's the resulting emotions from this structure that we're talking about. So when we're trying to do a junior youth group, we want to try to create this kind of a structure and this kind of thinking in our own minds so that we approach our junior youth this way. We have consultations about the importance of these clear limits, and we encourage everyone to think about service opportunities. And the result of that, of course, when you feel happy and joyful and secure and you feel like things are going well, yes, of course, you want to be creative and you're much more productive. It's much better. And that's the resulting actions that take place instead of aggression and apathy. And then as this creativity and productivity starts, we astound each other more and more and more with what it is we're capable of doing. And that's where we have to put our focus, not on what we're not doing, but how we can create an environment that's going to create this to happen. Okay, Roy, I want to hit the next one. The big concept, developing youth's capacity for making wise decisions, is central to effective service. And what this means is youth are the ones that are developing their capacity, but adults have a responsibility also to support this. And why? Because we only have so many resources. I think I spoke about that last week. We only have so many resources. So we have to think about what is, if remember the acupuncture analogy, we have one needle. We can put it somewhere in this cluster that's going to change things. What is it going to be? So if we have a youth, the most effective place to put that is in helping junior youth group develop. Why? Because one youth then becomes 10 youth in a very short period of time. And now we have 11 people to help us. So we're building resources to change the community. But if I just take that one youth and make them go and pick up garbage all the time by themselves, they're going to pick up the garbage, all right, but it's not going to give us an army. And we need an army of people that start to think differently in order to change the world. So strategically means we look at our situation, we figure out where's the best place to put our energies and how to multiply our effectiveness and the energies of others. So let's look at the next one. 5 steps to prayer. So I wanted to mention these because sometimes we don't know what we're doing. And sometimes we think we have some ideas, but we don't know. Sometimes we have no clue. Now, the 5 steps of prayer would be, in this case, if we're talking about making wise decisions, we could say, what would be the wisest decision I could make to be of service? And then we could do these 5 steps here. But that's the question. What would be the wisest step I could make, given my circumstances, all my difficulties and my shortcomings, to be of service? And then we'd look at step 1, pray and meditate about it. Use the prayers of the manifestations as they have the greatest power. Then remain in the silence of contemplation for a few minutes. So after you say these prayers, when you get yourself in a nice spiritual state, then you just remain quiet. Now you've been talking to God, now it's time for you to listen. And then the second step, arrive at a decision and hold this. This decision is usually born during the contemplation. It may seem almost impossible of accomplishment, but if it seems to be an answer to a prayer or a way of solving the problem, then immediately take the next step. So you've asked for guidance, you get some idea, and then you reflect on that idea and you make a decision and you hold it. So that's an important thing. You say, okay, I'm going to try this. I'll give you a crazy example of this, okay? And it's crazy because because it's kind of bold, and it's an example that happened to me. I was praying in the National Assembly's chamber with the National Assembly members of Canada, the 8 other members. And during those prayers, even though I wasn't asking for more ways to serve, it kept coming to me that I should start a Baha'i-inspired university. It just kept coming. And I kept moving away from it, and it kept coming back. So at the end of the prayers, I said to the National Spiritual Assembly, just as a matter of interest, I'm going to start a university. And you can imagine, if you were to say that to your friends, what they would think. I didn't really think about that because, well, one or two of the responses was interesting because it was kind of like, well, actually there was a dead silence. And then there was one person said, you mean you're going to consult with the National Spiritual Assembly about whether or not you should start a university? Which was the thought about how they might proceed. I said, no, I don't know if it'll ever happen. So I don't want to bother the National Assembly with this. I'm going to start and I'm going to, I'll keep you, I'll keep you informed with what's happening if anything happens. But I was afraid of being that committed, to be truthful. I didn't want to bring it to the National Assembly and then they give me guidance and then I'm really committed. So, so then I sort of skirted that one out and I just left it and everybody went home after that. So then what happened next? Third step, have determination to carry the decision through. Many fail here. The decision, budding into determination, is blighted, instead becomes a wish or a vague longing. When determination is born, immediately take the next step. Okay, so I got some of my resources, starting to do research on how to start a university because I've never started one before. I didn't know anybody that started one. So I was going to try and get some information. So I started getting information. I involved a few people like Todd Smith and a few other people in this plan, and everyone and more people got involved. But then I was still scared to really be committed, right? I'm not writing anybody still. But then the National Spiritual Assembly at one of our lunches, Hussein Banani, who was a good friend and one of the members, said, Gord, if you're going to do this, if you're serious about this, because I was just telling them a little bit about what had gone on. He said, if you're serious about this, you really need to write the House of Justice because they'll want to know and they'll want to provide guidance. And in my head, I'm thinking, no, I do not want to do this because that means I'm going to have to do it if they say yes. And if they say no, it's okay. But I'm afraid they'll say yes. And then where am I? I'm stuck. Because if the House of Justice says yes, I got to move. I was already moving, but I didn't want that. So I'm saying this because why was I afraid of that? We're afraid of it because of our fear of failure. I'm not operating in a learning mode then. I'm operating in a fear of failure mode. Like I don't want to tell the House of Justice or formally tell the National Assembly when I could fail at doing this. So I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to start working on it. And at a point where I feel like I'm confident, then I'm going to do it. Okay, so let's move to the next stage. Because I did write the House of Justice because he insisted, and he's such a sweet guy, and he just was so persuasive that I thought, okay, I guess I have to do that. So I did it. And of course, I got a letter back from the House of Justice, which I'm still working on what they asked me to do. It's not over yet. And already I've done a lot of things to try and do it, along with many people that have worked very hard. So step 4, have faith and confidence that the power will flow through you. The right way will appear. The door will open. The right thought, the right message, the right principle, or the right book will be given to you. Have confidence and the right thing will come to your need. Then as you rise from prayer, take at once the 5th step. So all this is happening so far in your head after you've said your prayers. You've made a firm decision of what you want to do. You're going to carry it out. You can also do the steps of prayer after you've had a consultation. And then the 5th step You have to act as though it had all been answered. Then act with tireless, ceaseless energy. And as you act, you yourself will become a magnet, which will attract more power to your being until you become an unobstructed channel for the divine power to flow through you. And so in the process of the university, just to give you some idea, the House of Justice gave a couple of letters of guidance, very, very capable people. More than 21 professors were engaged to create courses. You know, Dr. David Smith, counselor at the time, and many, Mame Smith and Duncan Hanks, and this group. I have to tell you, the House of Justice said in their letter to me, we have no doubt that your group will be able to create this. Well, imagine if you got that letter. I'm thinking, who's my group? I'm thinking, no doubt. I was really getting scared now. But I thought, okay, who is my group? And the group that had been working with me on the development of Nancy Campbell Academy were the people I'd mentioned and some others. So they had all helped to build that institution. So I thought, I'm not going to go and get another group. This group is the group that has come up with this. So let's continue. So we did. We went through the whole process. The government of Ontario, the mayor of Stratford was giving us 20 acres of land for the university. The House of Justice praised the city council. The city council started activities. Then the provincial government at the time was against private institutions and tried to get us to join, to give our university to Waterloo University. We didn't want to do that. So in the end, the minister did not give us approval, even though we went through a $500,000 proposal and acceptance of this university process and all the courses we did and everything. And why did they do that? They referred it to the minister saying, we approve of it, essentially. But the minister refused, and he had the political right to refuse. So that made all this work in vain, except we're not done yet, because now I'm going to BC and Ontario again, because the government's changed, and it'll just take a little longer. We're going to have a Baha'i-inspired university because the House of Justice said they have no doubt. And I'm going to act as though it had been answered, and I'm going to continue as long as I have breath until that happens. Why? Because that's a mandate that was given to me, and that's something that I have to fulfill if there's any way I can. Let's move to the next slide. That's a very ridiculous, dramatic example, and I say ridiculous because that's not what we should expect of, you know, anything, but it's sometimes we get asked to be an instrument, even though we don't plan to be ourselves. And often we find ourselves doing things in service that we never thought we would do. But because it will make a difference and make others' lives better, it's good. Abdu'l-Baha provides an overview of what could be regarded as the levels of development to be sought. Every imperfect soul is self-centered and thinketh only of his own good. But as his thoughts expand a little, he will begin to think of the welfare and comfort of his family. If his ideas still more widen, his concern will be the felicity of his fellow citizens. And if still they widen, he will be thinking of the glory of his land and of his race. But when ideas and views reach the utmost degree of expansion and attain the stage of perfection, then will he be interested in the exaltation of humankind. He will then be the well-wisher of all men and the seeker of the weal and prosperity of all lands. This is indicative of perfection. So in this age of maturity, we have to take ourselves out of ourselves. The best thing we can do for ourselves is forget ourselves in order to be of service. Of course, we have to balance our home responsibilities, as this quotation is saying, and all of that. But I'm gonna stop my chit chat there. If we can go take this down, Miss Roya, thank you. And if maybe what we can do now is have more of an open discussion about any of these ideas or questions you might have to look at how do we do things If anyone wants a copy of this PowerPoint, we can send it to whoever wants us to send it to them, and then people can get copies. Maybe you want to have it, because I'm thinking about the 5 steps. If you weren't able to jot it down, it's important for us to think about. But that's, why don't we just have you ask questions or make comments or inspire us with your thoughts?